Welcome back to the table. Today we've got a full review of Star Wars, the deck building game. This came out, just a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, a week or two ago.
And we were thinking about doing a Just Played for this, but then we played it a few times, and we thought, I think we're in a position where we can give you a full review on this game because we've played it enough. And there's really not a ton to this game. Like many FFG games, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg because there's probably going to be a lot more content to come out, and that's kind of a key component of, I think, some of the things we want to talk about.
Yeah, also I think that this deserves more than just my first impressions. Like, I wanted to make sure that we actually got this game played enough to kind of analyze some of the things, because a lot of people have been talking about how swinging this game is, how important luck is, and some people have already been house ruling it. So we wanted to kind of actually get our own experience and see if we agree with those things, and if we feel like maybe some people are overreacting after a play or two, or if those are really actually problems with the game. So we'll talk about that here during this review as well.
Yeah, and just to give you the briefest of overviews, if you haven't watched any of we did a live play on this, and if you haven't seen the game played or know nothing about it, it is a deck building game in one of the most traditional senses of the word. You're playing head to head, so one team is the Empire, one team are the Rebels, and you're going to be either acquiring cards or attacking cards in the galaxy row. You're going to have a base that might be protected by capital ships if you've collected those, and you're going to be spending one economy, the credits, to purchase cards, and then you're going to be spending the attack economy to attack both cards in the galaxy row and then hopefully, ultimately, the base.
Yeah.
And when you attack those, it has to go through the capital ships that they've put up. But once someone's defeated, and it depends on how you want to play, you can defeat 3 bases and win, or I think the standard game they recommend is to play to 4 bases.
Once you've kind of experienced the game, and then there's a variety of different bases you can choose from every game. You're going to be using either a starting setup. They do have an encouraging starting setup, or you can kind of just choose your own. One thing I do want to just get right out of the way, this is not the most complicated deck builder. If what David just said sounded very simple, this game is kind of basic. It does in some ways feel dated, but I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, because you've got to think about the target audience for this game.
Yeah.
This is kind of a gateway deck builder. It does share some things in common with games like Ascension and games like Star Realms. This is the one that you want to play first. If you're a big Star Realms fan, you're going to find a lot of the same enjoyment in this game, a lot of the same abilities to create combos and synergies within your deck building, but it's geared towards that beginner audience. In fact, they even give you tokens for tracking damage and tracking the credits you earn, so you don't have to keep all that information in your head and go back and think about how everything is being handled. And in addition, they boiled the game down to really just those 2 factions, the Rebel and the Empire. And there is some neutral cards that allow for some depth. You can kind of customize your play with those neutral cards as well. But they kind of, I don't want to say handheld, because they really don't, but they do give you some guidelines. Because if you just buy cards from your faction, you don't have to think too hard about deck building. It's kind of doing that for you. And again, I think that's good for new players. It gives them a kind of a guideline to follow. If you just keep buying the best card of your faction, you're going to at least perform well.
Yeah, I think, and the game is very fast-paced. I think also for new players, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot going on your turns. I'd say even more so than some other deck builders I've played. There's a lot of immediate satisfaction in what you're doing. And it also does a couple of cool things. Now, I'm not as familiar with deck builders. I mean, I've played plenty, but not like Ryan. But some of the things that it does that are kind of interesting and unique and specific to this game, I think, are the way some of the cards are. So if an Empire card comes up that's a unit, he could buy it as an Empire player, but I'm sitting on the other side and I'm looking at what it takes to defeat it.
Yeah, to destroy
so
or sabotage
I destroy it, or what they call sabotage it, I'm going to commit some attack to it, and then there's a reward, and that's written upside down along with that value. So when you're playing across the table from each other, both players have information for some of these cards, but the information is a little bit different. The other cool thing, and it's kind of a pretty significant part of the game, is the Force. So there's this track that starts with the Rebels, because the Force is with them, but that couldn't go back and forth. And a lot of the cards will trigger off of whether or not the Force is with you, which means it's all, on some portion of your side of this track. Some of those cards will be a little juicier than they would otherwise. And if you start with this token all the way on your side, you're also going to get an extra credit at the beginning of every one of your turn. That is definitely something that is going to go back and forth. There are cards that manipulate that, of course. And there's a lot of cards out here, last thing, that have just a ton of flavor if you're a Star Wars fan.
Sure.
I do think it goes without saying that this game is made for Star Wars fans. Like, if you're a deck building fan, an enthusiast gamer who are looking for the next deck building game to try, and you're not necessarily a Star Wars fan, I don't know that this is going to be terribly exciting for you.
It does still do a lot of fun things, which we'll talk about, but the theme nails it. I mean, it's super thematic, and the deck building game here, the 2-player pack that we have, has characters all the way from Rogue One through the original trilogy, which again, tons of room for expansion there.
Yeah, it doesn't even have all of those.
It doesn't even have all of those.
There's some missing.
Some missing. Yoda.
Yoda's not
for
in
one.
Here.
We're like, where's Yoda here? But I'll say this. So for being a heavier gamer like myself, or somebody that really loves a game like Star Realms can lead to some very satisfying moments. There are so many different factions in that game, and as you're kind of buying cards and building your factions together, you can get to a point where you're eventually just playing so many cards and just triggering off all these abilities. That takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of luck, and it takes a lot of skill in Star Realms. I will say this game gets you like right into that, because all of the cards are giving you so much stuff, and because they kind of have built-in synergies. If you're buying Empire cards, you're buying Rebel cards, they work together really well, and there are some structured themes that run between those two different sides. So you'll have a little bit of balance, but also some different play styles. You get right into that, triggering all of your different abilities. Every card can add credits that you earn. They can add force movement. They can add combat strength, which you can use to attack the cruisers, the bases, capital ships. You get right into that action. And yeah, it has that same deck building thing where like your first 2 hands are kind of the same because you start with a starting deck of 10 cards, but they get vastly different. And it's just fun. It just is so many satisfying turns mixed into this game. Again, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. Like one of our games, Darth Vader took out Luke on the road, and I was like, well, that's alternate history Star Wars right there. Right. That was a lot of fun. That was a fun moment.
And I did want to say that's the other side of things. Like I said earlier, if you're not a Star Wars fan, it may not land as well. But I played this with a less enthusiast gamer, a friend of mine who loves Star Wars, and they really, really dug this to the point where I kind of feel like they left here wanting to go out and buy a copy for themselves.
Sure.
Because it just does recreate a lot of those moments in Star Wars from time to time, like Luke and Vader, other things too. There's so many characters, and they use these characters and the mechanisms on their cards in such a way that makes a lot of sense. For instance, there's a Jawa card, and when you play the Jawa card, you can exile that card, which means to put it out of the game. You don't have it anymore. But then you're able to go into the discard pile and purchase a card from the discard pile that is not in the Galaxy row, which you can't typically do. The Jawa is scavenging through the discard pile, which is cool. There's a lot of little touches like that that really bring the theme through significantly.
And that leads me to what I want to say is my number one thing about this game. And for example, in that same following, I had Director Krennic, who you know from Rogue One, oversaw the construction of the Death Star. If he's in play with the Death Star, he gets better.
Oh, really?
He draws cards if he's in play with the Death Star as your base. And that's one thing I want to mention that I think really makes this game unique are these bases. Because even though, yes, as the Empire, I'm generally buying Empire cards, you might see a lot of the same Empire cards every time you play the game. Your deck might end up being kind of similar, but these base cards, there's so many, and you're only going to see 4 in a game. And each one of these cards kind of emphasizes certain strategies within your faction. Like I've got cards for the Empire that focus on if I draw cards, it's better. I've got some that actually encourage me to not buy Imperial cards, but buy the neutral cards, and it triggers off of buying neutral cards. The Death Star can blow up capital ships, and there's just a wide variety of things that go on with these bases. Sometimes it's at a point where you're actually almost hoping that your opponent blows up your base that turn because you really need another base out the next turn because you can really take advantage of that ability. I happen to have a base that let me take a card for free, and David blew up my first base right when Darth Vader was out. And those are cool moments that happen because of these bases. And I think these are what's going to keep the game fresh and unique every time you play.
This game anyway, until they have more content. And I do want to say, just to give you a better idea of how those bases work, unlike a lot of other games where you're doing damage just to the other player, you're going to be cycling through, like Ryan said, maybe up to 4 of these bases. Now, it doesn't mean you're only going to see those 4 bases. You get to look through your whole deck of bases if you're playing the standard game to determine which one you want to put out. So all those cool things that he just mentioned, they're very situational. Like if there is a card like Vader that's out, you might like want to play that card that lets you just take him for free. But there's other ones that do slightly different things, and it depends on what the situation is. You might have had a strategy and things have gone haywire and you need to pivot. So you're like, oh, you know what? Ryan's taking the Force way over to his side. So I'm going to play this card that brings the Force 4 back in my direction.
Right, which wouldn't be useful if you already had the Force.
Exactly.
Because, and again, that's a cool element of the game as well, that the fight over that Force track, and the fact that a lot of your cards are going to trigger additional bonuses based on if the Force is with you or not. That's pretty cool. There are some, like David's, the Rebels have a lot of discard, which can be frustrating to be on the other side of that, but the Rebels have a lot of discards, and if they have the Force, it's even more punishing for the Empire player. Yeah, you're discarding cards randomly now, and so fighting over that can become important, or you can just choose not to and focus on one of the many different strategies. There are a lot of different ways you can play your deck, and there are a lot of different ways you can build your deck. Even though this is a more guided experience than some of those other deck building games, I think that is incredibly helpful for newer players or players that don't really play deck building games like this. It's just such a satisfying experience, but it's not without its flaws.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest ones, and this is what people are talking about a lot online, is this market row. And the fact that you're buying cards that are yours or neutral, you could end up in a situation where the entire market row is filled with your opponent's cards. And yes, you can destroy them, sabotage them, or whatever, but if you don't have the right kind of deck built, if you don't have enough combat strength to deal with those cards, you just have to hope that your opponent buys them. And that can lead to some feel bad moments when you really just like have a great hand to buy with, and there's literally not a thing. Like you can buy these Outer Rim pilots for 2 credits, whatever. But that's just a stopgap. Like I really would like some more manipulation of this row.
To balance that, and I would agree. I think that is something that you need to be warned of, particularly if you're an enthusiast gamer. I think newer players, and the game plays so fast, it's not like it's super punishing at times, and it's swingy. So that can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. I'm going to talk about the good part of that at first. Like that turn you were just talking about where it could be a feel-bad moment, that's generally going to be preceded or followed by a moment where you play a hand where you happen to have 15 attack.
Right.
And you just outright blow up a base in one swoop because there's no capital ships on your opponent's side. So a lot of those big moments happen, which is really exciting for players who play this for the first time, maybe for the second time. But I will say for an enthusiast gamer, this base game anyway, if you play this maybe your 4th, your 5th time, it might start to feel, okay, we kind of know what this game is doing. Sure. Outside of the bases and how those can kind of change things up, it's, I think, going to start to feel pretty samey pretty fast to an enthusiast gamer. And until, of course, FFG puts out
I'm sure.
more and more content, which I think will be coming. But I think the hunger for that extra content from more hardcore gamers is going to come pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they introduce some other advanced game modes. I've already seen people, like I said, house ruling it, so there's always like one neutral card in the market at all times, so there's always something about just house rules that people have, right, and variants on BGG. There are other game modes. They've teased a 2v2 game mode, which they're going to be releasing the rules for online soon.
Oh, is it not in the rules?
No, it just says it's coming soon. So I think they're still kind of working on the development. I'd like to try that. And you know, with digital age being what it is right now, there's no reason they couldn't come up with new variants and advanced rules for advanced play. But in my experience playing this game, like we had the most recent game, we actually played again right before we filmed this, so it was still fresh. It started out very much with the Empire's cards in the row. David had really nothing to buy for the Rebels.
I mean, it stayed that way a fair amount.
And it stayed that way, but he didn't suffer. In fact, if we had been playing to 3 bases instead of 4, he would have won because he got his 3rd base first.
I had that one big turn I was talking about. I had a ton of damage, and I took out his 3rd base. And had we been playing to 3, I would have won. But the problem with my strategy in that game is I decided to take the few cards that I did purchase were attack cards. I didn't purchase a lot of purchase cards.
Right.
So I was not having a great time buying cards, and like Ryan said, I didn't have a lot of cards to buy other than some of the neutral ones that came out. And attacking cards in the Galaxy row can be beneficial at times. There's some that have rewards that are really good, but a lot of the smaller ones give you bonuses that oftentimes may or may not really help you do what you need to do that turn. Moving the Force. If you're not caring about moving the Force, meaningless. 1 credit isn't a lot to move the dial. But I did. I took out 1 base, but then I knew at that point, because he had been building up a massive deck, which usually isn't maybe necessarily the best strategy.
A lot of capital ships in there, a lot of combat in there.
But he had a lot of defense on his base, and almost every hand he was able to purchase a ton if he wanted, or do a fair amount of damage.
But again, that does come down a little bit to the luck.
Yeah.
And again, that is going to happen. I managed to get 2 Star Destroyers from the row. I had some of my highest powered cards come up and be able to be purchased. But the thing is, and we'll talk about this. We'll give our final score here. But you got to understand that it's swingy for both sides.
Yeah.
And that if you have one game that's really poor and you didn't get anything, the next game you could get everything and have a really good game. And when a game plays in 30 minutes, I don't feel the negative effects of that.
Yeah.
Nearly as much as if I just spent 2 hours playing a game.
Yeah, if you get really caught, and let's get to our scores, because I think we can talk a little bit more about that. I would give this game a 7. I think that is a 7 with a caveat that with more content, that could go up. With a little bit more time, with more things going on in the game. I think my initial experience I felt was a little higher.
Yeah.
But then, like I said, I think as you play this more as an enthusiast gamer, this is going to get a little stale until they get more content out for it, which inevitably they will.
I agree with that. I was wavering between a 7 and an 8. I'm actually going to go with 8.
Oh.
But here's why. Because as the hobby gamer that I am, as somebody that plays a lot of deck builders, this felt like a 7. But then when you got to think about, like, what is this game setting out to do?
Yeah.
How well does it do it? And this game is setting out to be a mass market deck building game that anyone that loves Star Wars can grab off of the shelf at Target or Barnes & Noble, take it home and learn it. It's not hard to learn, and the rulebook actually talks you through not just how to play the game, but what a deck building game is, how a deck building game works.
Yeah,
it's a really good rulebook.
For as simple as this game is, it's a 31-page rulebook, which you might think, what? But it really holds your hand through.
A ton of illustrations.
It literally says a deck building game is this. So, like Ryan said, and I would take it a step further. If you're going to grade it on that basis, if you're someone who's excited about this property, you're not a hardcore gamer, you're going into a Target, a B&N, or whatever to pick a game like this up, this is nearly a 10 for the Star Wars fan.
Right. I mean,
this is a great experience. That person's not going to sit here and invest time over months and years and play this over and over and over. But for what they're going to get out of this, for the price point, I think they're going to get a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, and I think if you're a hobby gamer, don't shy away from it. It's still super fun. It's not an expensive game either. And there's a ton of content in here. It's going to get you a lot of plays. It's going to get you a lot of really satisfying moments. And I am very excited to see what they do with this system. I want to see more expansions. I want to see them cross. I want Clone Wars stuff. I want Rebels stuff. I want Force Awakens trilogy stuff here. I want all of it to come into this game. Maybe the holiday special expansion for just in time for Christmas.
Yeah, if we were rating this on movies, I'd say I'd give this a Return of the Jedi.
Yeah,
that's where this stands.
From holiday special is Return of the Jedi.
Holiday specials is 0.
Empire Strikes Back is the 10?
Empire Strikes Back for me would be the 10.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.